Alright, we've been talking about economic development ad nauseum in the last few videos, but in this one we need to talk about how men and women are not equal recipients of the various aspects of development. If you've been on this course for more than 5 minutes, you're like, no duh, but we still need to consider some of the details of women and development in our world. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So the big idea to remember here is this: as a general rule, as countries develop economically, women's roles in that society change. For example, there's a strong connection between a country's level of economic development and the education of girls. As countries become more developed, girls have more access to education and tend to stay in school longer. And that's because for a long stinking time in the history of our world, male children were preferred over female children, since males often had better chances of getting jobs and earning income. So in that case, they thought, why waste resources educating little girls when all they're going to do is grow up and have babies and make sandwiches for their husbands? And that sort of rigid gender hierarchy is often present in the least developed countries in the world. But again, as countries become more developed, those attitudes towards women and their contributions change in a more positive direction. In fact, in some of the most developed economies, women enroll in college at a higher rate than men, as is in the case of the United States, as you can see here. The percentage of women to men is about 60-40 averaged across all states. Oh, and by the way, if you want note guys to follow along with this video and all my videos, check the link in the description. Anyway, increasing levels of development also have significant demographic effects with regards to women as well. As economic development increases and more women participate in higher education, they tend to delay marriage until they're older, and thus they have fewer children in their lifetimes, and that can cause declining fertility rates, which in turn slows the growth of population. And again, if you remember all the way back to Unit 2 when we had a blast learning about population pyramids, you'll remember that the pyramids for more developed countries actually show declining populations for that very reason. And then compare those to pyramids in less developed countries, and you see women with less economic opportunities having way more children than their counterparts in developed countries. For example, in a country such as Niger and sub-Saharan Africa, women average more than 6 children in their childbearing years, so you know, that's a lot. But here's where I tell you that even though the rate of education for girls and work opportunities for women are on the rise, there still exists a noticeable gap between men and women in terms of wages and opportunities in many places. And when geographers want to talk about the equality between men and women in terms of access to education and earned wages from work, they use the term gender parity. And don't get confused, parity is just a fancy word for equality. Because why say it plain when you can say it fancy? And if you want to know more about that, I talked all about gender inequality and the index that measures it in the previous topic video for 7.3, so you can have a look at that. Anyway, the various levels of development in countries also correspond pretty tightly to levels of gender parity. Less development usually yields less parity, while more development usually yields more parity. And in those places in the world characterized by low gender parity, there often remains an implicit understanding that some types of work are men's work while others are women's work. And in general, men's work consists of going to a job or bringing the crops to market or dealing with the finances or whatever. And women's work mainly consists of domestic duties like working the fields and raising children and keeping house, which is to say, making the sandwiches. However, in those places, there tend to be certain sectors of the workforce that are still considered women's work, like school teaching and secretarial work or nursing. But you didn't think that gender economic inequality was just a phenomenon in developing countries, did you? Don't be crazy. No, even in the most developed countries where women have more access to what are considered men's jobs, they still often get paid less than men for the same work, which is a phenomenon known as the wage gap. For example, as of last year here in the United States, women could expect to earn about 82 cents on the dollar compared to men across all industries. Like, take a man lawyer and a woman lawyer and give them the same set of responsibilities, and this guy is going to get paid $100 an hour while this woman is going to get paid $82 an hour for the exact same work. And the difference between the two is not the quality of work or expertise. The difference is that he's a he and she's a she. Even so, gender parity in wages has a distinct spatial arrangement. Less developed countries tend to have a wider wage gap, whereas more developed countries tend to have a more narrow wage gap. But at the end of the day, the gap be gapping regardless of levels of development. And finally, gender parity can also be assessed in terms of women's access to employment. Like, out of the world's top 500 highest earning corporations, only about 5% are led by women, which suggests that women are vastly underrepresented in the highest levels of employment, and thus persisting ideas about men's work and women's work might contribute to keeping them out. Okay, now there is one particular solution to the gender parity problem that you need to know about, particularly when it comes to women in developing countries where the inequality is even greater. Over the last few decades, a new endeavor called microlending has been implemented to empower women economically. So microloans refer to small loans granted to impoverished women for the purpose of helping them start or grow a small business.
Oh, that sounds unfair. Why don't we give the loans to men too?
Well, my uninformed interloper, it turns out that it's a well-studied phenomenon that women who participate in economic activity tend to invest far more of their earnings than men into their family's well-being, including things like clothing and education. Therefore, in empowering women economically, whole societies can be changed for the better. But, and you knew there was going to be a but, there are critics of microlending policies. The critics point out that in cases where women are unable to pay back their loans, they often fall into deeper poverty. But even so, microlending continues to be a popular practice to empower women economically in developing developing countries. Okay, click here to review other topics from Unit 7, and click here to grab my video note guides, which will help you get all the content of this course firmly crammed into your brain folds. I appreciate you coming around, and I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.